just to introduce myself for some of you that are a bit new to our group, my name is Esther Lessing, and I'm the founder and director of Business Analysis Excellence. So I'm running a 6 weeks BABOK online study group that you have joined. So welcome, and I hope you've been able to catch up with week 1's content. This week, we'll be looking at elicitation and collaboration. Great, let me share my screen with you. Okay, so week 2, wonderful. So the next chapter we'll be looking at is chapter 4 in the BABOK guide, and this is all about requirements elicitation and collaboration. This is one of the knowledge areas that a lot of business analysts do pretty much every day to some level or extent. So let's see what this knowledge area is all about. Just before we get into that though, let me just remind you of a few important things to know. The first thing you need to understand is that the knowledge areas do not follow each other in any sequence. So they are standalone knowledge areas. Plus, remember that the BABOK guide is not a business analysis methodology. It's purely a knowledge guide about the profession of business analysis. And something else that's important to keep in mind too, especially if you are still new to business analysis, the tasks that we described within each knowledge area, they can be repeated throughout the life of an initiative or a project. So you could find yourself repeating the same business analysis tasks multiple times to evolve or mature your information. Okay, so now let's get stuck in to the knowledge area called requirements elicitation and collaboration. So according to the BABOK guide, elicitation is the main path to discovering requirements and design information and might involve talking with stakeholders directly, researching topics, experimenting, or simply being handed information. And collaboration is the act of 2 or more people working together towards a common goal. So now that you understand the absolute fundamentals of what this knowledge area is built on, let's have a look at the different tasks. So this knowledge area is made up of 5 different tasks. The first task is prepare for elicitation. The second is conduct elicitation. The third, confirm elicitation results. The fourth, communicate business analysis information. And the fifth is manage stakeholder collaboration. So during this video, we will look at the first 3 of these tasks, and then we'll follow on with the second video to look at the 4th and the 5th. So let's first now start with the task, prepare for elicitation. So if we go back to the BABOK guide and we have a look at how they define the purpose of this particular task, it is to understand the scope of the elicitation activity, to select appropriate techniques, and to plan for or procure appropriate supporting materials and resources. So think about, perhaps at this point, what do you normally do when you prepare for elicitation? So the elements for this task: firstly, understand the scope of elicitation, select the elicitation techniques, set up the logistics, secure supporting material, prepare stakeholders. So let's jump right in. Great, so the first element that we're looking at is understanding the scope of elicitation. Now this might sound a little bit over the top in terms of all the different things you have to do, but the bigger your elicitation effort becomes and the more people that become involved in it, the more important each of these preparation steps are. So I do really urge you to take note of them. So So first of all, you'll consider when you think about the scope of your sessions or your overall elicitation efforts, you'll think about what is the business domain that I'm currently in. So understand the landscape. Also understand the overall corporate culture and the environment that you're working in. This has quite an important impact on how you decide to do your elicitation. And the more you work within different companies, the more you'll learn that there is actually quite significant differences between companies. So it's really worth your while understanding the culture. Stakeholders. Of course, you need to understand not only who they are, but where they are. And something that you sometimes can only learn with a bit of experience and getting to know the people is what is the team dynamics. So do stakeholders mix well? Are there a lot of political history that you need to know about or sensitivities? So it's important to try and understand as much as you can about your stakeholders. So outputs, of course, you need to think about what is the expected outputs of the elicitation activities that you're planning. How skilled are the business analysts that's part of this? Like, are they quite experienced and strong characters so they can run quite large workshops? Or do you have a team of less experienced BAs that might feel more comfortable to produce good results in a smaller type of group setting? All of these types of things you need to think about. You also need to think about the actual technical skills of the BAs. Are there any other complementing elicitation sessions happening? So could you potentially avoid asking stakeholders to give the same information twice? And this is actually quite important. There are quite, one of the things that could get stakeholders upset is if they feel they're repeating themselves to different teams. So if you're able to minimize any of that happening, try and understand what are the elicitation sessions happening in projects that's running in parallel, and potentially you can piggyback off that. So what's the general initiative, strategy, and approach? This is important as well. So do you have a lot of budget to spend on lots of elicitation, and do you have a lot of time? Do you want to know every minute detail at this stage? Is it important? Or do you go on a just-in-time basis with your elicitation? So it's good to understand what is the general strategy and approach. And of course, as you know, in the previous week's lesson around business analysis, monitoring, planning and monitoring, we also talked about the approach. So do you have an idea of what the actual solution scope is at this stage? And that's important to incorporate in your planning. And of course, are there any existing business analysis activity that could be an input into your elicitation activities? There is nothing, I think, as frustrating for a stakeholder than having to give you information that you could quite easily have found somewhere else. So be mindful of that before you start including questions to stakeholders where the information has already been covered. Okay, so the second element, this is about selecting the elicitation techniques. Now, keep in mind that you'll probably use multiple techniques during your elicitation, and think about what are the techniques that the company you're working for normally use. This could help a lot, because if your stakeholders are comfortable to give information utilizing a certain elicitation technique, then you will probably have better and faster results than if you are coming in with a brand new approach, brand new technique that does exactly or very similar elicitation activities to something that they might be used to. So try not to confuse your stakeholders with technical techniques just because you like to use them. So just be a bit sensitive around that and mindful. And then Of course, an important consideration, and this is something that you'll learn as well as you become more experienced, is what are the best suited techniques for what you are trying to achieve. And then, of course, if you've chosen some techniques, what do you need to prepare for it? What do you need to have in place and ready to be able to use those techniques effectively? All right, so the third elicitation, prepare for elicitation element is set up logistics. Now, I am not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's about what are the goals for your session, who's coming, where will the location be, is it virtual, is it a physical location, have you booked all of the rooms, have you set up any virtual rooms that you might require, how do you communicate to your participants, so what is the format, how do you invite them, and so forth. And of course, do you need to produce any of the information in more than one language? So all of these are quite common kind of factors to consider setting up any large meeting. Okay, so element 4, secure supporting materials. Now, this is really just about, again, being prepared. So where can you find information about this particular topic that you want to elicit information of? Would it be people? Would it perhaps be systems that's already in existence? Can you find historical data that could help inform you about what you need to know? And are there any materials or documents already available? And of course, like we mentioned before, outputs from other elicitation sessions. Try and utilize and reuse as much as you can. It's always easier to go into a session fully prepared and simply getting stakeholders to validate rather than starting from scratch. Right. Now let's look at the 5th element around preparing stakeholders. So keep in mind that you may well decide to use a new technique, or it might be a new set of stakeholders. So you might have to go and explain your technique, your decision for your technique, and of course the approach and the goals to your stakeholders. So make sure you prepare your stakeholders for what you would like. The more informed they are and the more comfortable they feel, the more successful you will be within your session. And of course, you may need to send them some information to pre-read. Now, I know they don't always find time to do that, but it's still worth sending it, because you'll find some people will in fact pre-read and they'll feel more comfortable to contribute if they could have prepared some questions before the session. All right, so that was the first task, prepare for elicitation. During the next session, we'll talk about conduct elicitation. Okay, so with conduct elicitation, I hope you enjoy my conductor I've got here, but it's all about to drawing out, explore, and identify information relevant to the change. So there are a few different types of elicitation. So you get collaborative, and this is when we directly interact with stakeholders. You get research. So this type is when you actually go and do some research in terms of the historical information and resources that might be available to you. And then the third type of elicitation is experiments. So this is when there is unknown information that we have to discover through experiments, and you can use prototypes, proofs of concept, or observational studies to perform this type of elicitation. All right, so let's now look at the elements that's part of conduct elicitation. So the elements firstly is to guide the elicitation activity, and the second element is to capture elicitation outcomes. So imagine now you're in the middle of a room. You are either doing elicitation collaboratively in a workshop or perhaps in a one-on-one setting. So if we look then at element 1, this is just about you while you're doing your elicitation. Make sure that you can stick to the agenda as much as you can without necessarily hindering the process. So don't be too religious about it, but keep an eye on the agenda. Keep track of the scope and of the change and the planned outputs. So make sure that you are actually describing requirements that fall within the scope of what you're talking about. How output fits into the program. So it's good that you understand, as part of the output that you're generating for elicitation, be clear about how will this output be used and where does it fit. And then, of course, to just add to that, who and how will information in fact be used. So the second element of conducting elicitation is about capturing the elicitation outcomes. So make sure that you capture all of the outcomes for both the planned and unplanned elicitation sessions. And this is actually quite easy to forget sometimes, because you might bump into someone somewhere in a hallway and have a really good session talking to them on an informal and unplanned basis, but they could be giving you really good information. So make sure that you capture that afterwards and potentially follow up with an email and just say, hey, we discussed this. This is what you've said. Is that correct? I'd love to include it in my materials or my elicitation information. So make sure that you keep track of all the different types of elicitation results. And of course, then don't forget to incorporate all of the output that you've done during your workshop or your interviews and put that into your existing elicitation materials. Think about this. Imagine you run this wonderful session. You've got a few people, you capture in fantastic content on flip charts and so forth, and you never go and get down to the detail in terms of documenting that into the real requirement sets and artifacts that has been shared within the team. Please don't make the mistake to forget that all of that small, nuanced, valuable knowledge that you've just had a discussion about in your workshop needs now to be captured accurately into the actual business analysis information. All right, so that was just a brief discussion around conducting elicitation. Now let's have a quick look at what does confirm elicitation results then mean. So according to the BABOK guide, the purpose of this task is to check that the information gathered during an elicitation session for accuracy and consistency with other information. So first of all, the elements are compare elicitation results against source information. And the second element is compare elicitation results against other elicitation results. Okay, so here it's simply about take your elicitation results that you've captured, could have been in an interview, could have been by doing research, or it could have been a workshop, and go and compare it against the source information. And source information could be documents, could be people that gave you that information. Just go and make sure that your requirements that you've captured is in fact what was intended and is well understood. And the second element here is you can compare your elicitation results against other elicitation results. So what does this mean? It basically just means go and check that there's no conflicting information between the elicitation results you've gathered in a particular setting with another elicitation session that could have been held by a colleague or potentially a different group of stakeholders. Go and make sure that the two sets of information is adding up and saying the same thing. And if you find that there's any conflicts or anything that's not clear, just go and resolve it with your source, elicitation sources. So that's really all that's about. Now over to you. Although sometimes, with elicitation, collaboration, we kind of take some of it for granted. And some of the things that you might have heard here might sound very obvious and common sense, which it is, but it's also worth taking note of it. Just make sure, double check yourself and improve your own approach and your own skills when you conduct elicitation collaboration. So perhaps you can now go to the Facebook group, see if you can raise a few questions about this topic. Share how you and what's the challenges that you face within your particular environment. Sometimes we have very particular issues that's preventing elicitation. There's so many different variations of elicitation sessions and stakeholder groups, corporate culture, things that might work in one company might not work in the next. So it's really good if you can share some of those examples with each other. And is there anything here that we talked about that you would like to emphasize a bit more for the exam? Maybe share that with us as well in the Facebook group. Okay, so we've run through the first 3 tasks. We will now soon run through the last 2, and conclude this particular knowledge area. But for now, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you very soon.